I'm Kevin Kumashiro. I'm the founding chair of the Education Deans for Justice and Equity, a network of deans of education across the country. And I'm also the former dean of the School of Education at the University of San Francisco. The National Days of Teaching Truth are so incredibly important in this moment as we experience this increasing onslaught on public education, particularly on the teaching of truth. We see these attacks on what some call critical race theory or queer theory. We see the don't say gay type of legislation or anything about LGBTQ people or really anything about systemic racism, systemic sexism, homophobia, or even anything that makes people uncomfortable. And I think we can see the impact of these attacks on at least two levels: what happens in classrooms and what happens outside of classrooms. So what's happening inside of classrooms with our students? Well, one thing I think that's pretty easy to see is that if we limit what they learn about the world, if they're not learning about the world as it is, with all its beauty and all its problems, then by definition, they're limited in their ability to engage in informed decision-making and in informed debate, right? We can see that education really is central to advancing democracy, right? Without sort of seeing what the world is really like, we're limited in our ability to flourish in life and to engage in democratic processes. So when education is done right, it can help to advance democracy and justice. But when it's so greatly censored, it can also reinforce or even exacerbate existing inequities that are part of the status quo, right? Education shouldn't be about teaching us to fit in merely into the world as it is. Education should be about building our capacity to imagine the world as it could be and to move towards that if we so choose. And that's why I think education is also not something that's necessarily supposed to be always comfortable. Like, education shouldn't be about affirming what we believe, or maybe even more so affirming what those in power want us to believe. Like, education should be about building our capacity to really question the world as it is and to explore whether there are problems out there that we can address as we may try to make the world a better place. And I think this links then to what happens outside of the classroom. The impact of this legislation is not just on students, it's on sort of everyday people in society, right? Think about how the kind of sensationalist rhetoric about what's being taught as critical race theory, for example, is riling up a base, right? It's getting people really upset, and it's riling a base to act. What we see people doing outside, like parents, members of communities, they are threatening and attacking teachers. They are protesting at and disrupting school board meetings. They're voting for certain kinds of candidates or certain kinds of initiatives. When you cultivate distrust in the public system, you're more likely to get people to support the alternatives, which in this case would be privatization initiatives. So hand in hand with all of these attacks on curriculum, we also see the calls for expanding school choice, expanding voucher programs and neo-voucher programs, expanding charter legislation and charter funding, right? All of these are initiatives that siphon funds away from public schools and earmark them for the private sector. When you dismantle and displace the public system, which historically supports those most on the margins in society, you also open the doors for profiteering by those who are most elite. Once again, we see that education can advance democracy, but when it's done in really problematic ways, it can also exacerbate existing inequities. And so we need to really build the social movements that say, schools can be better, the world can be better, and we insist on pushing back against these attacks as we advance a different way to imagine what schools can and should look like. I think that's what the National Days of Teaching Truth are offering us, and they also offer us a model for what schools should be doing throughout the year. I hope you all will join this initiative.